An awful story. It's an awful situation. Interestingly, on the front of the Telegraph today, the European Union and Macron both are kind of urging a ceasefire, or at least some kind of projection towards a ceasefire. But I just don't really see how that can happen at this point. Can you?
Well, I mean, Hamas hasn't really complied with any ceasefires in the past, so I don't really see what they mean by that. I mean, presumably what they're wanting to stop is any more bombing of Gaza. But, you know, the Israelis said right at the beginning, after that horrendous weekend of killing and rape, and it's just, you hardly want to even talk about it, especially since those pictures came out yesterday. I mean, I often say to someone, well, what should Israel have done in response? I mean, the only thing that was going to satisfy Hamas is if the state of Israel is destroyed.
It's destroyed, exactly.
And how are they meant to, you know, attack Hamas without either going in with tanks and so on, which I think would be pretty disastrous in that kind of built-up area. But, you know, it's interesting because for me, it's not a comparison with the IRA, Mike. But,
I was going to ask you about that.
It's not quite a comparison, but there's no doubt about it, you know, that in communities where the IRA was very strong, there were an awful lot of ordinary, decent nationalists, even Catholic people, who didn't support the IRA, but very difficult for them to speak out. And similarly with, I'm sure, there are a lot of Palestinians in there who are desperate keen to have a kind of more open democratic society, but you know they're likely to be shot.
And I think the difficulty in both of those situations for people who were, shall we say, sympathetic to the cause of the IRA, a united Ireland, or certainly to get Britain out of the north, as it were, you know, they might have actually agreed with that. I mean, there might well be people in Palestine who they don't support Hamas absolutely.
No, but
they don't support what they did, but they support what they want.
Well, I mean, the two-state solution, which is something that, you know, I certainly have always felt was going to be the only way in the long term that we'd get real peace. But the reality is Hamas and other Palestinian organisations or non-Palestinian organisations, because let's not forget a lot of this is coming from outside Palestine, have rejected that. You know, they don't want that. They want Israel destroyed. And I think that's the worrying thing, because what we've seen, and I've just been pretty shocked at what we've seen here in
I think we
the
all
United
have.
Kingdom.
I think everybody's been shocked. I mean, we saw the story this morning about the tube driver, and some people say, well, what's the problem with free speech? Well, there is a problem with a tube driver, in my view, encouraging a chant of free Palestine while he's on his day-to-day job driving a train. With people who are going on that train who seem to have completely forgotten and become oblivious to the horrors of October the 7th in order to try and make a political point that Palestine has been subjugated for centuries by Israel. You know, it just doesn't seem believable.
It was quite chilling, actually, because if you'd been someone sitting there, just a quiet person going about your business on that day, happened to get on that tube, had sympathies with Israel or were Jewish, you would feel very, very
Well,
threatened.
we discovered yesterday the reason the story came out in the first place was that a friend of Kevin O'Sullivan's, Wendy Henry, who you might know, who was a former newspaper editor and who is Jewish and who had gone down to Piccadilly to try and sort of, you know, take a stand, if you like, for people who had sympathies with Israel. She was on the train with her husband, and that was how the story came out, because she felt very intimidated, as you would expect, to be in a sort of a crowd of people. I mean, if we're watching some of this footage that we see, people covering their faces, shouting jihad through loudspeakers, you've got the police. I mean, you've got history, of course, in City Hall here in London, the police saying, oh, well, you know, when they say jihad, it doesn't necessarily mean a holy war. It might just be that they're being... I mean, you go, come on!
I mean,
you know, Sir Mark Rowley, really?
Absolutely ridiculous, that whole sort of, as if they brought in all these sort of psychiatrists and psychologists and academics to sit and work out what the meaning of a word was. Absolutely outrageous. But it's interesting that the tube driver's just been suspended for investigation. So I imagine what they're hoping is that it'll all go quiet then, and that, you know, he won't lose.
My worry is that these marches will continue. I mean, the people who organise them have said that they want to continue marching sort of every weekend until this is resolved. Well, it's not going to be resolved anytime soon.
And then, you know, when you compare that with the amazing, very, very solemn pictures that came out of the Trafalgar Square Israeli support, was just so moving, them singing, and none of that kind of going out. And, you know, the real difference when people say about how awful it is, what Israel are doing in Gaza, the real difference is the Israelis are not going in and deliberately going into homes and murdering children and doing that. Yes, they're bombing.
There's no,
they did try to warn.
As we've heard quite often on this channel from various people on the Israeli side of the argument, there's no equivalency between what Israel is being accused of doing.
But that's what some of the people marching wanted to make it clear.